Thank you, Lucy Beadnell, for being here with us this evening. This is a fact presentation, the Fredericksburg Area Council on Transition on supported decision making. And Lucy joins us tonight from the ARC of Northern Virginia, where she's the Director of Advocacy. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. And again, thank you.
Thank you all so much for having me here. As Courtney mentioned, my name is Lucy and I work at the ARC of Northern Virginia. I'm here to talk about supported decision making, which is an area where I have been doing a lot of work in the last few years and where we've seen really wonderful and amazing things happen for people with disabilities. So I'm very excited to have the chance to talk about that tonight. The presentation that I'll share tonight was originally written as part of a grant we did on supported decision making a couple of years ago. So that's why you'll see some other groups' logos and some grant language here on the front screen. But without further ado, I'll go ahead and dive in. Please feel free to put questions in the chat at any time. I probably won't stop to answer them in the middle of the presentation just so we don't get too off track, but we'll absolutely make time to answer your questions. So tonight, my goals are to talk about the basics of supported decision making. What is it? How would it work and why would I do it? Those kinds of things. And usually once we get those basics out, we start to have some what if sort of questions. Would this work in this situation? I'm worried about this kind of problem. And we'll talk through some of those. And once we have a good foundational knowledge of supported decision making, I'll give some ideas on how you could get started making supported decision making work for you and some examples of other people who have. And then in the end, I'll go over some resources where you can learn more about supported decision making, and you can always reach out to me directly. You can't ask me too many questions, I tell people. So if you want to have an email or a Zoom conversation at some point in the future based on what we talked about tonight, please feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to do that. Supported decision making isn't a program, it's really an idea. And it's just putting a name on the idea that pretty much everybody in the whole world sometimes gets help to understand and make their choices. It's part of pretty much any culture. So if you've ever talked to someone who was a homeowner before you bought a home, or talked to your spouse or your best friend or a coworker before you changed jobs, you use supported decision making. If you ever held up two sweaters in the dressing room and asked the person who's there with you, which do you think looks better on me? That's supported decision making. It's just the idea that when we're confronting choices, big or small, there are people around us we trust to give us ideas and advice and help us make that choice. They don't take that choice away from us and they don't make the choice themselves, but they help give us ideas that make sense for us. And then we use those ideas to make our own choices. Something I talk a lot about is how supported decision making can change someone's capacity to make decisions. So let's talk about what exactly that means. I love math and numbers, and I am pretty good with them. But if you put me in a room with a stranger and told me I had 15 minutes to write a budget for the year for my entire household and make sure all of our bills were paid and everything was taken care of, I would probably really struggle with that. I would probably tell you, I have some of these skills, but I need support. I need to look at our old bills. I need to use a spreadsheet. I need a calculator, and I need some people helpers too. I want to talk to a financial planner. I want to talk to the person who manages our company's retirement plan. I want to talk to people who seem to do a good job managing their money. I want to talk to people who bought a house in our area about how much that costs, or a loan officer, right? That would be examples of me using supported decision making. So if you locked me in a room with a stranger and said I had to pass a test to pay bills for our family, I may not. But if you let me use the tools that I need and had the time that I needed to work through using those tools and figuring out a plan, my capacity has changed, right? In one situation, even though I'm the same person, I couldn't make my budget. And in another situation, I could. And that idea is true for everyone, and certainly for people with disabilities. who may need things explained in a different way, who may need some help to implement their choices, who may need some help to explore options. But once those things are done in a way that plays to their strengths and they're given enough time and support to make those choices, all of a sudden we see new capacity emerge. Capacity doesn't mean you do it all on your own all the time. Capacity means you know when to get help and you get and accept that help, right? That's how we build our capacity in a lot of ways. Supported decision making, like I mentioned, is part of life for everybody. I've never met someone who doesn't ask for the opinions of others every once in a while. And it's certainly an important tool for people with disabilities because for many, many years in history, when someone with a disability turned 18 or got close to age 18 and had the right to make the same choices as other adults, sometimes the people who love them got really worried about that. They thought, I'm not sure we're ready yet to make all of those adult choices alone and be responsible for them on our own. And until about 20 years ago, just about the only option usually presented to people was guardianship. And that really meant then we'll make sure that person can never make an adult choice for the rest of their life. Someone else is the only person who can talk to doctors, who can make a decision, who can sign their name, even if that person could do it with help and would do it with help, or even if those person's abilities grew and changed over time as they matured and they had the same kinds of life experiences we all do that teach us things. And it was unfortunate in a lot of ways. We saw people with disabilities lose their civil rights for the rest of their life out of an effort to protect them. And there just aren't very many times when taking away all of someone's rights and control about their own life does a lot to make them safer. So this is where the idea of supported decision making comes into play. And though we can recognize that maybe there are some people who so far technology and the world hasn't yet taught us how to consistently communicate things into them and get responses back out that we can understand, it's a pretty small number of people. Most people in the world use some kind of decision-making support for small or big choices. And if someone with a disability needs a lot of support to understand and make their choices, still means that they are able to do that work just with help. Just like any of us, we can own a car, but we can't maybe change the oil and do engine repair work on our own. We rely on mechanics to do that, right? We get helpers and we trust the advice of those helpers to make things work for us. That's the same idea as supported decision making. And I would say even for people with guardians, the guardian's job is not to dominate that person's life and do what they think is objectively right. The guardian's job really still is as best they can to leverage supported decision making. What do we know about what this person cares about and loves, their values, their preferences, their culture? How do we use that to help us guide decisions that are of value for this person, right? So it's a long way of saying supported decision making is important for everybody. And sometimes for people with disabilities, it's a really important way of protecting them from more restrictive options like guardianship. Let's take a look at how this might work for someone. And here are some examples. You could think of, goodness, dozens of areas of your life, right? Relationships, transportation, money management, you name it. And so here are some examples of some areas of life on the screen and some ways that someone could use supported decision making, which really just means in this area of life, how am I going to get help? So let's say we were talking about money. And I would say often, sometimes people think guardianship or conservatorship, which is guardianship of someone's financial assets, is the most important or the best way to protect them, especially if that person is maybe vulnerable in understanding the concept of money and making sure that they don't get scammed or something like that. And I would say we need to be really careful with that idea because guardianship is a piece of paper and conservatorship is a piece of paper, and they can't undo or fix scams or swindlings for people with disabilities any more so than they can for the rest of us, right? That's an area where we know we're all vulnerable. We have spyware catchers and antivirus software and phishing email catchers and all kinds of things to try and get those things out of our life. But any of us can be fooled. Usually for people with disabilities who are having trouble understanding who's the right person to talk to money about and when and to give your money to, trying to teach the subtle art of detecting scammers may not be a realistic goal, but a goal that says, if there's ever someone who asks you for money or talks to you about money, then it's time to call, FaceTime, text, get in the room with who's your support person, mom or dad, brother or sister, your aunt who's a financial manager, whoever that looks like. And that's a much easier and brighter line to draw. Anything money, this is your go-to person, right? And you don't do or sign or give anybody money until you bring that go-to person on board. And that can really increase someone's capacity. You can also use tools like a special needs trust that will enable the person with a disability to spend money, but only on expenses that won't jeopardize their benefits and that are in keeping with what you said you wanted the money to be allowed to do. If you put that money there, for example, as the parent. So maybe as a parent, you say, motorcycles are fine, tattoos are not. And to prevent that person from going out and spending thousands of dollars on tattoos, the special needs trust would simply say, you know what, we're not allowed to pay for that for you. Right. And that's another tool that can help the person without taking away their rights and their choices. It's just the rules for how their money is leveraged. Another option would be with Social Security benefits to have a representative payee, a family member or a friend or even an agency who's responsible for using that Social Security each month to pay that person's bills. And whatever is left after that, they would help the person buy things that they liked, clothing, music, outings, whatever it was that was important to that person. But those are tools, unlike guardianship, that cost little to nothing and help the person with the disability keep their power and maximum control over their life, but still give them a lot of supports. On the medical side, you would maybe use a tool like a power of attorney that says, okay, every single doctor that I have, I want login information for myself and my uncle who's a physician. I want test results to go to both of us. I want him to be able to be in the room with me when we have meetings, when we have appointments. I want to be able to record our visits so I can go back and listen to them later. I want to use a chart of the human body in our visits. And I want you to remind me to talk to me in human speak and don't use big, complicated doctor words. Those are all examples of supported decision making. On the education side, supported decision making, again, you could use a power of attorney saying, I'm going to be in this room and I'm going to be a part of my IEP team, but so are mom and dad, or my grandmother, or my best friend, or whoever it is that comes in and helps me. And they are going to talk through things with me. They're going to help me sign or figure out if it's a good idea to sign because I want to be a part of it, but maybe I can't do that completely alone. And we're going to look at our IEP ahead of time so that we have a chance to really talk and think through it. And after we leave our meeting, we're going to take that IEP home before we sign it. Those are all simple examples of supported decision making that hopefully get our heads thinking, yep, I can see how in all kinds of areas of life we could use different tools that add up to ways to help us understand and make choices. We have a document in our resource library. And if you wanted to share the link for that now, Courtney, it's a great time for it, called 100 Ways to Use Supported Decision Making. And this document's in there. This is page 1 of 3 or 4 in that document. But again, many, many, many examples of how would this work? It depends on you. So in each area of life, employment, relationships, housing, we talked about money and education and medical care. You would think, do I need help? Okay. What kind of help does that look like? Is it a power of attorney, which means someone can go in and do it with me and be notified with me? Is it that I need to grow a skill? I need to take a class on this? Is it that I need to call or text somebody? Is it that someone's going to go with me or explain it to me in my own terms or help me use my communication device? Whatever that is. Am I going to call my ADA center to ask about accommodations? There's many, many, many ways that you can use supported decision making. And I would say sort of the gift and curse of this idea is it's completely person-centered. Gift for the obvious reasons The curse of that being, it can feel overwhelming when you first look at this and you think, well, then I don't know what to do. With guardianship, I just hire an attorney and I pay them $3,000 or $4,000 and we go to court and it's all done and wrapped up. But here, I'm not sure what to do. And we'll talk through some tools to figure that out, but it really involves looking at the person with a disability and figuring out what specific help do they need and what paths can we take to try and get them that help. And is it going to be a document or is it going to be a tool like an ABLE account, a special needs trust, a representative payee agreement, right? There's lots and lots and lots of ways to meet the goals of financial oversight and management, for example. All right, why do we talk about this so much? Well, because now we have about 50 years of data that say self-determination, that feeling that I have control over my own life, increases safety and quality of life, regardless of the level and nature of the disability. Meaning even someone who has a disability that impacts them really significantly in a lot of ways still benefit from feeling like they have maximum control over their life. They still are safer. And part of that is because when we rely on sort of old-fashioned tools like guardianship, we say, oh, mom will take care of that. Dad takes care of that. Your brother or sister takes care of that. They do it. And someone can become accustomed to believing my opinion doesn't matter, which certainly has an impact on quality of life, or I don't have to know anything about that. Someone else will take care of it. And maybe mom or dad or brother or sister make a questionable decision, or maybe they ultimately later marry someone who makes questionable decisions, or maybe they pass away. And we've never taught the skills for who's going to help out now. And that's a really vulnerable position in which to put someone. But instead, like I talked about drawing those lines, maybe you can't handle medical appointments completely on your own. Maybe you have a power of attorney that says someone always does with you. They always get appointment reminders with you. They always go to the doctor's visit with you. They always review results with you. A power of attorney is a great way to do that. And that way you're making sure the person with a disability feels included and empowered. You are absolutely sending a message to their medical providers that they are a person with thoughts and opinions that matter and should be spoken to with respect, which sometimes doesn't happen when there's a guardian and that's the only person who gets addressed in the room. Supported decision-making over time increases independence because we're having practice understanding and making our choices. And the amount of help we need to do that may change over time. For my kiddo with disabilities, it took us many years and uncountable many more prompts to teach him to do things like respond out loud when someone asks him a question than it did my other kids. But there was no choice. He had the ability to do it, so we were going to keep doing it. And if I had said, you know what, it's too hard, it's exhausting, we don't need to teach him that, he would really, really be struggling now a lot more than he has. We put in that time and effort every single time. This is the help you need to get that speech reminder done. It's a verbal cue, it's a prompt, it's a reminder, it's an example given. It's a reward when you do it. And over time, he really has darn near mastered that skill. And that independence level has grown. And that can be true for anyone with a disability. It may take us a lot longer to learn something, but certainly we are still capable of learning, especially when we've got good teachers. Another important lesson here, and I think this is something not often afforded to folks with disabilities, is there's a lot of dignity in being able to take a little bit of risk. I know that you think spending all of my savings, my last $250 on this computer is a terrible idea, but I really, really want it. Well, when you spend the last of your money on that computer and then want to go do something else and have to be reminded for months, there's not enough money. That's a pretty powerful natural teacher that doesn't make mom or dad or siblings the enemy because they're always saying, no, 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 I can't use my own money. I learned when I spend all of my money, there is no more money. And it hurts for a long period of time, right? Just in the same way, we live in a country full of people who are not necessarily the healthiest eaters. We live in a country full of people who have lots of debt and lots of unmanaged medical issues and maybe sleep too little or sleep too much, right? That's just part of being an adult that we afford ourselves. That's the risk we allow ourselves and part of being human. We don't expect ourselves to be perfect, and we don't have a fear that if we're something less than perfect with our spending and our eating and our relationships, that someone's going to swoop in and permanently take away all control over our own lives. We have an expectation. We're allowed to make some kind of borderline crummy decisions, and we're expected to learn from those, and people will still love us and they'll keep helping us. And over time, ideally, I'll learn a lot more. This is also nice because at its core, supported decision making has no cost, as opposed to guardianship, which has a cost of thousands of dollars. I would say $3,000 to $4,000 is a pretty consistent average, and that's a lot of money to spend, and that's to appoint someone one time. And if we appoint parent or parents, and we have someone need to go back later and put a guardian in place, they are going to have to spend that money again. Recognizing that with inflation, it may look like more money later on to hire more attorneys to change the paperwork to go back to court. And so before we spend that kind of money taking away someone's rights, we want to be really cautious and see, have we really explored all of the other options, right? Because this is something a lot of us are already doing in some form or fashion. Is this what you want for breakfast, or is that? Your teachers talked about this as an IEP goal. What do you think? It seems like you respond better to this at home, right? It's just sort of developing more of a system for those kinds of things. And you can start doing it right away. And there's no point too young, right? Even with little tiny kiddos, babies, and toddlers, we start as best we can giving them choices, understanding at a point in which they're screaming and yelling and slamming doors that they need a break, right? They are communicating with us. We're backing off. We're hearing them. That's just the beginnings of supported decision making. I'm hearing you need time and space. I'm going to give that to you. Let's see what that looks like. So for some people, these starts to bring up the questions, but something bad could happen. What if someone is taken advantage of? Absolutely, something bad could happen to anyone. But those studies that I mentioned about self-determination show us a tool like supported decision making, when used well, is more likely to protect someone. There has never once been a study that shows that just by virtue of having guardianship, someone is safer. It's wrapping supports and services, people who care and know someone around a person, and making sure that they have tools and places to turn that ultimately protects them. Lots of eyes and ears on somebody, right? And lots of good people that they can turn to for support. And in supported decision making, instead of having the burden be completely on a parent to stay alive and be healthy forever and ever, you're never allowed to die. You always have to be there to handle all these things. We start dividing up all the supports the person needs and saying, I'm really good at these kinds of things, so I can keep helping with those. But with those relationship kind of things, I'm not great at it. Who can we bring on board? Whose strengths can we leverage so that we're building a whole team of people to help us, and that all of this burden doesn't fall on mom and dad, recognizing that most people with disabilities at this point are outliving parents. And if we're facing that reality as we look ahead, we want to make sure that we've already got a team of people in place who are used to knowing and loving and caring about your adult child, who are going to continue on and help fill in those gaps when you're no longer there. So in terms of how you go about doing this, sort of depends upon the kind of person and learner that you are. I would say a great first step is to sit down with a tool that helps you understand, how do you make choices now and how would you like to make them? There's a document in the resource library Courtney linked to that I loved from the ACLU called When Do I Want Support? And across the first column, it's got a bunch of life areas, the same kinds of things that we talked about: relationships, education, money, medical care, etc. And the next column says, do you need any help in this area ever? Yes or no? I would say for most of us, the answer is yes in all of those. And then who do you want to help you? So if we're talking about relationships or money or education, who are the people you trust? And it should ideally be a mix of paid and unpaid people. Let's use medical care as an example. Maybe it's like I talked about, your uncle who's a physician who goes to the appointments with you. Maybe it's mom who remembers all your medical history, but maybe it's also the nurse practitioner at your doctor's office who's really kind and supportive, right? It's that team of people who you know and trust in all things medical who are going to work together to help you through this. And how do I want that support? I want a power of attorney so people can always go with me, be in the room with me, be notified with me. Or I want to sign a HIPAA release so that at least people can be communicated with in addition to me, right? Just getting on paper, like, who do I think I want and how are they going to help me? And then once you have those sorts of ideas down, I think it's helpful to look at how other people have done it. Huh, here's the tools they use. That makes sense to me, or that doesn't work for me, those kinds of things. And then from there, you should have a good idea on who is on your team to start with. This is an area where I would say we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. We don't want to say, this is never going to work because I don't have anybody in my life already who's an expert on this area who's willing to help me. Okay, maybe that tells us that's an area where we need to keep our eyes and ears open for someone. Or maybe we tell the other supporters on our team, I need someone here. Do you all have any recommendations? Who do you use for help here? Right? That's a good idea. And once we've got that team sort of filled out, we'll put on paper. Here's my plan. When I have to make decisions about these things, here's what I do. Here's how they help me. Here's how we talk to each other. Keep doing it, work that plan. And then over time, if you gain skills or if you see there are places where you need more help, you'll make adjustments. That's one of the great things about supported decision making. You can change the tools that you need at any time based upon what's going on with you. Some of my favorite tools that I'll draw attention to that are also linked in the resource library are one, an article called Setting the Wheels in Motion. So if you're a parent or a caregiver watching this session, I would say that's the best article for you to read with. It's written by a mom named Suzanne Francisco. She has 3 kids with developmental disabilities, all with very different needs. And the article is just a few pages long, talking about her journey as a parent, ultimately working with her kids and deciding supported decision making is the right choice for all of them. And then some worksheets she made for her family to help her and her kids fill out and figure out what's our plan going to look like. We had some people, by all means, like write their notes on a literal napkin and bring their ideas for us, or put things on a really complicated spreadsheet. If that's how you write and think, great. There's no wrong way to start putting ideas down. I mentioned that When Do I Want Support guide from the ACLU, which I like because I think it's such a simple way of walking through things. And again, as you fill that document out, I have yet to meet someone who sat down to fill out a supported decision-making kind of guide or tool and didn't ultimately find they had a lot more helpers than they realized, because there are lots of people in our lives who help in little ways, or we can go to for help in one area that when we think about who would be mom or dad 2.0, who could take over all of this, those are not the people that would come to mind, but they do have a role to play and they can help in some ways. And we really want to leverage their strengths. And I'll tell you, having watched a lot of people reach out to a supported decision-making team, many people were afraid. What if someone says they don't want to help me? They don't want to be on my team. We didn't have any of that. We had a lot of people being very, very flattered. People usually love to give their ideas and advice and opinions and to go to someone and say, your ideas, advice, and opinions are so good in this area. You are the person I trust. Can I call you? Can I text you? Would you go to some meetings with me when I have to talk about this area where you are so very smart? People tend to like that and respond really well to it. And we live in a magical era where people all over the state, country, world can attend meetings and appointments with us virtually, even if we're in the room, that couldn't before. So the people we can choose to be on our team are pretty broad. And I would say think big. Okay. I'll note that when we worked really heavily on supported decision making, working very intensely with people over almost 2 years, helping them develop and work their own supported decision-making plan, charting what happened with them, what happened with their supporters, what their parents thought later, what they thought later, all kinds of things. We worked with 10 folks from 18 to 40, half of whom had guardians going into the project, half of whom did not. Some people who were very significantly impacted by their disability, some people who were not. We left the pool of folks with whom we worked after this almost 2-year period and said, let's debrief. Tell me what you're thinking now. Of the group of 10, every single person said, I am going to continue doing this. This is a new way of thinking and doing things that took some adjusting at first and took a little bit longer, but we've seen skills grow. We are happier. People with disabilities in the grant use the word empowered, respected, loved, heard over and over again, describing their experiences working on a supported decision-making team, and how instead of telling them what they must do and someone else making the decisions, we helped frame any decisions that had to be made in terms of their dreams. You want to be a vet assistant for a living? Here's why showering is important. Because someone is not going to hire you to come to work in their vet clinic if you are dirty and stinky. It looks unprofessional for them, right? So if we were working on that skill of hygiene that the person didn't really love, we related it to the goal that they had, and their team gave reminders in that vein. Not, you must take a shower because that's the rule and I'm telling you. It was, I respect what matters most to you is this job. This is a way to help you keep that job, right? And at the end of our time together, our group not only said would they all consider supported decision making. Of the 5 people who came in without guardians, they said, thank goodness, we're never going to do that. This was a good fit for us. Of the 5 people who started with guardians, one said, we really are so impacted by our disability. We feel like we're always going to need some form of guardianship, but we are going to do that through the lens of supported decision making. And the other 4 people who had guardians starting off with said, we wish that we hadn't done guardianship. We're going to find some way to limit or remove it permanently in favor of supported decision making. It's a much better tool. It was a very, very powerful experience for us. And Courtney linked to this resource library, but I want to give you a little bit of a sense of what's on there. And it's at the ARC of Northern Virginia's webpage. But if you want to listen to long presentations like this or presentations from attorneys talking about supported decision making, it's on there. If you want a 1 or a 2-page guide, like I talked about, those 100 ways to use supported decision making, some quick facts, some ways to navigate if your supporters disagree on things, all those kinds of things are there. There are lots of great national websites on supported decision making laws and news around the country. The Disability Law Center of Virginia has a great free online power of attorney builder. If you want powers of attorney, those do with documents to help other people go with you to understand and make your choices, it's there. They can help you with advanced directives and give lots of information on rights and choices. If you're going to buy one book, I would say the book to buy is called Supported Decision Making. And the byline is From Justice for Jenny to Justice for All. Justice for Jenny is the name of a court case in Virginia Beach now almost 15 years ago from a young woman named Jenny Hatch who had Down syndrome and was put under a guardianship order that she really didn't like. And they ultimately got that guardianship order removed in favor of supported decision making, showing that even though Jenny had an IQ in the 50s, and that's what the argument for keeping the guardianship order in place was, she was ready, willing, and able to accept support from people she knew and trusted to get help. And that was a better tool for her. That book, Supported Decision Making, is written by the attorney who worked with us on our grant, who led Jenny's case years ago. And though it is written by an attorney, I think it's great at being human speak and being very readable and understandable. It gives great ideas for wording and powers of attorney, a lot of background on supported decision making in Virginia. The next thing on this list is that Setting the Wheels in Motion article I mentioned. There is a Jenny Hatch Justice Project, a whole website and group that works around that court case I just mentioned. That When Do I Want Support tool is there. And if anybody here receives services through the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services, so that might be a DD waiver or mental health supports or substance use supports, they have created a free supported decision-making template and plan you can use that will walk you through the kinds of things that ACLU document does in a little more detail and help you come up with a completed plan that you and your supporters can all sign and carry around with you. Not that it's a legally enforceable document, but it will refer to all the legally enforceable tools you want to use. Your trust, your able accounts, your powers of attorney, your HIPAA releases, your whatever it is. And it'll say, this is how we're going to work, team. And I would say getting a plan on paper with everyone's signature is a really powerful tool for helping people feel committed.